Hello, my name is Julie, and it's time to talk about the 12 books that I read in January. January took forever, as it has for the last couple years, goodness gracious. The world has absolutely fallen into chaos, and I'm still here talking about books. Feels weird. Unlike most months, I basically went into this month with no TBR, with the exception of the 3 monthly reading challenges that I'm doing this year, which are Buzzword, Buzzcover, and then my alphabet challenge that I'm doing on my bingo boards. I didn't have anything picked out that I needed to read this month, so I picked things off for different reasons, but it was nice to get sometimes mood reading done, but sometimes like books that I wanted to get off of my TBR out of here. But before I talk about the books, we can talk about my stats. I read 12 books in January for a total of 4,492 pages, with an average rating right now a 3.77, and 2 books I gave 5 stars. Had an average page count of 361 pages per book and 140 pages a day. I read 7 books that I owned. I added 3 more books to my owned TBR, and I didn't get rid of any on my TBR. Not physically, at least. I have been acquiring books to unhaul, but I haven't actually gone through the process of unhauling them. I actually subtract those books when they physically leave my house. So we are starting off the year with an annual net TBR of -4. Feels good. For star ratings, I had a lot of stuff in the 3-star range. I was trying to clear out some stuff, couple of 4s and 2 5s, which feels great. My genres were absolutely everywhere, but things that were in the general fiction sphere was my #1 genre. I read mostly standalones. I read 2 first books in series, not knowing that one of them was the first in a companion series. It's not my fault. I read 2 sequels. One of them is considered a companion, and I do count that differently for some reason here. I read a third of my books on audiobook, as always, and 7 of the books that I read were from authors that were new to me this year, while the 5 were authors that I've read from before. So let's get talking about my books. So I always love to make sure I start out the year with a book that I think is going to be a 5-star. So I decided to pick up a book that had been loved by my favorite booktuber and her general community who read it with her, as I was behind and didn't have the opportunity to read it with everyone else, but mostly because when I didn't know what this book was about, I wasn't interested in it. But once it had actually been pitched to me by someone who had read it, I was like, never mind, I want to read this. And that is The Compound by Aisling Rahl. So this ended up winning the Goodreads Choice Awards for sci-fi, I believe. And I was really surprised. I thought it was an underdog. I didn't think it was that popular. I would categorize this more as speculative fiction because the speculative element of it is not large, but it is omnipresent. This is set in a reality show taking place sometime in the near future. It is a dating show, but there also is some sort of heavy threat that appears to be hanging over the contestants that we're not sure what's going on. In the show, I believe there are 10 men and 10 women who are sent to the Compound, which is this house in the middle of the desert. They have to work together during the day to try to win achievements, get different items for the compound to make it a better place to live. Because when they get there, there's like barely any food, like it's an empty house, but there's also individual challenges that the people can do. But the shtick of the show is that in order to stay in the game, you have to be in bed with a member of the opposite sex at night. And if you are not, you are going to be eliminated. So during the day, there's banishments. There's going to be an odd man out of the men or the women, and whoever does not have a partner at the end of the night is going to be eliminated. There's all these challenges that individuals have to do that they're not allowed to let on that they're doing challenges to try to get things that are better for themselves. The thing about this book is that I have no idea why it worked so well. Why is this book so effective? Why did I have so much fun with this? Why was I on the edge of my seat? I am a person who loves a competition reality show. I'm currently binging through the UK Traders seasons. This being a book version of a competition show, I think really stuck with me. I like how this felt heightened above what a real life reality TV show would be. And I enjoyed seeing how the characters of all of these different contestants came out and seeing like what our main character was going to do. Was she going to be kind to the people that she had put up alliances with or not? I thought she was a really interesting perspective to read from. She is the kind of person who is made for this sort of game, and I just could not put this audiobook down. I did listen to this on audiobook, and I would recommend it if you're an audiobook listener. There's nothing particularly special about it. I just really enjoyed consuming it that way, and I did not want to put the audiobook down. I think that this says stuff about what people will do when they're forced into competition with each other. This is the kind of speculative fiction that leaves a lot of questions unanswered. So if you're the kind of person who likes that sort of thing, like maybe like Leave the World Behind by Rumaan Alam, I think that this could be a book that you really like. But it has this element of gamification that kind of felt like a video game to me as a person who loves a side quest. This has now entered the Hall of Fame of books that feel like video games to me. So like Dungeon Crawler Carl, Legends and Lattes, and this. I really enjoyed this. It's hard for me to put my finger on why, but this is like the vibe of like a fun read I want to have while also having like serious elements to it. I really enjoyed it. I ended up giving this a 5-star. Like, I don't know. I had no notes. Sometimes a fun book just does that. Then I also wanted my physical read to be a good bet for 5-star in case that one hadn't panned out. So I picked a book that had been in my TBR cart for a little bit too long, but it was mostly because I was reading other books by that author. And that is Anxious People by Fredrik Backman. I remember this being like the talk of the town the year it came out. This is about a bank robbery gone wrong. So there is a character that has attempted to rob a bank and didn't realize that the bank is actually digital and there's no money there. So the bank robber runs away and runs to like the first place they can get into, which is this open house for an apartment. And there's all of these people who are there for the apartment. We are kind of flipping back and forth between directly after and during the holdup to try to figure out what's happening then. This is a perfect example of Fredrik Backman utilizing dramatic irony like all the time. He is constantly trying to surprise you. I have previously read A Man Called Uva and the entire Beartown trilogy. This is one that I feel like I've heard people say is their favorite Fredrik Backman, and unfortunately, it is my least favorite Fredrik Backman, and I don't think it's close. I was actually pretty annoyed with a lot of the book. Really annoying the way it was like poking fun at some people. I think a lot of the characters that we're following are petulant. Like it takes for a lot of the book for them not to be like mean-spirited anymore, and I know like a lot of the plot twists are that they're actually not mean people, but I just like didn't really care about following them anymore because I found their dialogue a lot of the time annoying to read. I like that this was giving commentary on how money is a large motivating factor for people, how these systems that cause crime are these systems that are keeping poor people poor. But that wasn't like the major theme. The major theme is people need to love each other, that sort of thing, you know, need to have connection and everything. And it's that general fiction sort of, you know, keep on living sort of plot. I just felt like this was a poorer imitation of Fredrik Backman than what actually felt like Fredrik Backman to me. I just didn't care about these people, and I'm sorry. By the end, I was fine with this book, but the beginning, I was really just like rolling my eyes, especially like we have all these interviews with the police where everyone is being really stubborn and not wanting to answer questions. And like, I don't mind that these people are being stubborn and not asking questions. I just don't need to read that. It could have been cut out. I don't know. I wrote down a 3.75 for this book. I think Fredrik Backman is a very smart person who understands human emotion very complexly, and I appreciate him for that. And I think that continues on into this book. I just think that this is the worst take of his style that I've read. So then I read If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English by Noor Naga. This was a book that I had intended to be my very last read of 2025 if I had time after finishing Les Mis, and I didn't. I wanted to read it because I thought it was going to be one of Books and Lala's best books of the year, and it was. I could have tried to fit in a vlog of like reading her favorite books this month, and I just was like, I have too many videos. I can't fit that in, so I just read them for fun. This is a short general fiction that is taking place, I think, in like the early 2000s in Egypt. One of our main characters is a woman. She comes from an Egyptian family, but she has lived in America all her life. And now that she's in her 20s, she's wanting to kind of like spread her own wings. And so she decides to move back to Egypt. And the other person that we're following is a man who she meets there, who is a photographer who ends up mostly being homeless. He's struggling with addiction at the beginning of the book, and he does not consistently have income or a place to live. and the two of them start falling for each other. They start having a relationship with one another, but it becomes very tormented because of the pressures of their statuses in life and how dependent they are on each other and everything. And it becomes this like toxic relationship. The book is split into 3 parts, and each of the 3 parts is written in a different format. So I won't say what the other ones are, but for example, the chapters in the first section are all starting with a hypothetical question, but like in a poetic way, not necessarily a literal way. This book felt a little bit bland or distant to me until the last section, where suddenly I was like, oh, this is being put in a new light. This is giving me a different angle to what's going on. I really liked what the 3rd section did, and that was like more a story that I was interested in. I was less interested in what felt like very little going on in the first 2 sections. There isn't a lot that is going on with these characters outside of each other, and I just did not feel entranced. I think that this is a book that is going to work for you or not, because it is writing style heavy. If you're not getting along with the writing style from the beginning, it probably isn't going to entrance you by the end of it. And I think that that's just like to taste. How many of my favorite books are like, yeah, nobody's going to like this because the writing style is just really particular and happened to work for me. I think toward the end, it was telling an interesting theme about how people are allowed to tell their own stories and how sometimes people try to speak for others. It was talking about an interesting relationship where people are sort of questioning what is good and what is bad and what was the right thing to do. And this does have the perspective of somebody who does not see other people as human as they are, and that might be a tough read. And I think that that's always a interesting line to toe, and whether someone likes it or not, again, a taste thing. So for me, this one, the first 2 parts of this book would have been a flat 3-star for me. And then the last section, I think, was like a 4.25. I was liking that. So I think I'm happy putting this in like a 3.75 category. This just wasn't, I like what this was going for. It just wasn't a perfect read for me. Possibly my number 1 reading goal of 2026 is to get the books that I acquired in 2023 or used, which is a very overlapping Venn diagram, out of here, because I feel like I just don't have a good enough turnover time for the books that I have picked up from used bookstores. So I really want to focus on getting those books that I just decided to pick up on a whim. If I had seen them at the library, I wouldn't have picked up, but because I saw them for cheap at a used bookstore, I decided to buy them. What's wrong with me? So when keeping this in mind and trying to get a book that I have been looking forward to that was off of that list for a while, I read Sharks in the Time of Saviors by Kawai Strong Washburn. This is a general fiction with like a light speculative magical realism element, kind of a you don't know how much of it is real sort of thing going on. This is about a native Hawaiian family over, I want to say like 20 years. It's over the course of the lives of the children. So we are following the perspectives of the mother and then the 3 children, Noah, Dean, and Cowie. And Noah, who I believe is the middle child, he ended up, when he was a child, falling into the ocean. They were like going to save him, and then this shark ended up like pushing him up out of the water and saving him from drowning. And since then, he has been hailed as this like person who can do miracles, specifically around healing, ever since he was a kid. And that helped bring the family out of poverty, and that set up a lot of the dynamics of how the family interacted and caused a lot of tension in the family. Dean, the older brother, is always getting into scrapes, and he was able to get out by being on a basketball scholarship. And Cowie is the youngest sibling who feels like she has been ignored her entire life and is trying to carve out an identity for herself, especially because like more in the back half of the book, I did not know that this book was not from a native Hawaiian voice. He was born and raised in Big Island, but he does not come culturally from a native Hawaiian background. So I think that that's something that I would not have prioritized this book at all had I known that, because I do want to be picking up more own voices books. Regardless of that, quality of the book, I read so many general fiction that I really, really loved last year. So I was like, okay, I'm mood reading. I'm wanting to pick up more general fiction that have been on my shelves for a while because maybe they'll be bangers. But the thing is that like the literary fiction that I loved last year was like super, super popular stuff. And this is not super popular. And I just felt so meh about it. Picture a family drama. That's this. Like it didn't feel like there was a lot of of plot going on. I think there's like kind of a shift of what happens to the children over the course of the book, but there really just wasn't a strong backbone in this, and that bothered me. And I just didn't feel like the book really went anywhere other than setting up the different dynamics between the characters. And even those I didn't feel that strongly for. I think Cowie is the character that I probably liked following the most, but like it just kind of ends in a nowhere place that just left me unsatisfied, that I was kind of like, okay, well, what was the point? Also, I'd like to note that this book has more mentions of farts than any book I've ever read, and I was a Captain Underpants kid when I was little. The hell? Why? I think I was expecting this book to go in more of a speculative fiction take, sort of a magical realism, like Gabriela Garcia Marquez kind of vibe. And it didn't. It definitely stayed within the realm of general fiction. There was more of a question of if there's something speculative going on and it doesn't ultimately matter, but it also doesn't end up playing out very much toward the end of the book. I just was waiting for something to really hook me in, and nothing really happened. So this is a book that I'm glad that I've gotten off of my TBR because I've had it for a while, but it just didn't really work for me. So I'm 3-ish. Then I needed to work on getting some series sequels on my list this month. So I ended up listening to Brigands and Bread Knives by Travis Baldree. This is the first time that I've listened to any of the Legends and Lattes books. I've read the other two physically. This is the flagship cozy fantasy series. And in the previous books, it has been following Viv, who is this orc who is retiring from being a mercenary and opens a coffee shop. And in the second book, which is a prequel, she's helping Fern, who is this bookseller that she meets while she's on the mend while being a mercenary. Fern has now decided that she is closing the bookstore and moving to where Viv is and going to restart there, maybe open a bookstore there. And she ends up being just like paralyzed with fear about this decision about changing her life this much that she ends up getting like blackout drunk, passing out, and falling into the cart of this legendary fighter figure who's lived for like hundreds of years, thousands of years, or something like that. Fern is just along for the ride and is kind of wanting to get back, is trying to apologize for just up and leaving with no answer. Fern is trying to figure out what she wants with her life while talking to this immortal figure who has done basically the same thing with her entire life. Okay, I don't know if this was the audiobook, or the fact that it's not Viv, or the fact that it's breaking the formula of what this series has been in the past, but I didn't care. I really found it hard to pay attention to the audiobook of this. I don't think it's poorly performed. I do think that Travis Baldree's voice doesn't match the vibe of this series. As much as I love having authors read their own work to like get the full intention of what their words mean, his voice isn't the one that I would pick to tell this story. And I don't think that it's his fault that I wasn't interested in this. I don't think it has to do with the audiobook. I do think it is the plot. The previous books I was interested in because it's trying to work on this business side of things. It is this kind of like, management game, but in a book. I appreciate that. I like that a lot. And Bookshops and Bone Dust I wasn't like entirely keen on, but Legends and Lattes I do agree with the public that it is special. This book did not have the vibe of this series at all. Like the only thing is that it's a shared character. I do think the stakes feel different than they did in the other books. I think that it feels like there's not that much going on with Fern. I liked her figuring out what she wanted to do, like in the end, because I think the answer was good, but I just like didn't really care about like the journey that like the physical journey that these characters were on. I didn't care about the different characters that they interacted with. I just felt so meh about this whole book that I just wanted to zone out every time I was listening to the audiobook, which was such a weird experience because I found the other ones pretty pleasant to get through. I don't know, it kind of reminded me of The Teller of Small Fortunes, which I read last year, which I think was also pretty boring. I think I should pick up fewer books that are cozy fantasy that operate in the adventure sphere, because I just don't think that it works as well when you're deciding to lower the stakes of an adventure fantasy. This one didn't work for me. And if we don't get back to the shop in whatever the next book is, I was under the impression that Travis Baldree has a contract for 5 books in this series. I might be skipping it. I felt like it was written by the same author in the way that like the characters' dialogue was written, but I just couldn't be bothered. And it's really hard for me to put my finger on why I couldn't be bothered, because I couldn't be bothered enough to be analyzing while I was reading. 3-ish. An actually very good sequel that I read this month was Before the Devil Breaks You by Libba Bray. This is the third book in the Diviner series, which is, let me get this all out right, a YA paranormal horror fantasy historical fiction series. It's a mouthful. This is set in New York in the 1920s, and it has this spooky, little bit of horror, a little bit of fantasy vibe. We have a bunch of characters who are all teenagers who have different magical powers, and they are called diviners, and they are trying to beat all these paranormal things that are trying to hurt New York City. And in the first book, our main character, Evie, can read objects, and she ends up getting involved in this investigation into these killings that keep happening of people that New Yorkers don't really care about, and trying to figure out who this killer is, as it is a paranormal entity. This book is the third book out of 4, and it deals with these ghosts that are popping up all over town. I actually do really like kind of the episodic nature of this series, in that every single book has a different bad guy that they're trying to take down. There is an ultimate bad guy who is what we're going to be facing down in book 4, but I think it just has this nice flavor of making each of the books feel independent of one another, that they are trying to fend for themselves in different ways. I like how in this part of the series, we have fully fleshed out this dynamic of our ensemble, of all of these different kids that we're interacting with and how they're all dealing with their powers. I thought her name was Delta. Her name is Theta. That's embarrassing. I think Theta was a particular standout character in this book. She's always been one of my favorite characters in this series, but in this book, we are getting a little bit more of her background in why she has tried to suppress her powers from the other people, even though almost everyone around her has powers, and she's in this clique, and like nobody's questioned that she doesn't have powers, and she's kind of hiding hers because of how she has used them. And I think that the danger that is surrounding her backstory, I think, felt very real. I just like how these characters play off of each other. There is a lot of romantic relationships going on between them, and that was the one note that I had for this book, is that I thought it was so weird. There's this one section of the book in which Libba Bray decides that every single pair of characters that is going to sleep together like within the same chapter, within like 3 chapters of each other. It's like one set of characters almost hooks up, and then 2 chapters later, 3 different pairs of characters hook up or do the equivalent. And then like a chapter later, that character goes to the other character in their love triangle and hooks up with them. And I was like, why do we have to all do this at the same time? It felt weird, especially because this is YA. As an adult, I kind of felt like I was on the fence about like, okay, maybe the description went a little far. But you know, this is not intended for younger YA audiences. I would say that this is upper YA for sure. It's fine, but I was kind of like, But other than that, I think that the metaphor of the paranormal in this book was great. This specific paranormal aspect, I think, worked so well as the ghosts of New York's trauma are trying to resurface and take over. And the way they decided to combat that was really fun. But the thing that I think is the thing that makes this book stand out is how it is talking about history of New York and of the 20s at the time that isn't necessarily taught in schools all the time. It's talking about the eugenics societies that were active at the time. It is talking about racism. It is talking about anti-Semitism. It is talking about the labor movement at the time, the pressure against immigrants. It is talking about evangelism and also the spiritual revival that was happening at the time. There are all of these different like giant social forces that are going on. It is doing it in an entertaining way while also maintaining that education. This is a series that has kind of fallen under the radar in terms of the YA canon that I do think should be sticking around way more than it has. So I'm really glad that I decided to keep with this series because I had the first book on my TBR for so long and just didn't get to it. And I'm so glad I decided to continue on with it. And immediately, I mean, literally the day after I finished this, I found a copy of the final book at my bookstore. So I should be able to finish that out this year, especially because I didn't get to it in 2025, which I was really sad about. So I gave this 4.25, 4.5 up there. It's real good. Then again, on my general fiction kick, picking up books from authors I've read from before, books that I've had for a long time. I've had this one since 2022. Really happy to finally have gotten around to it. That is Beautiful World, Where Are You by Sally Rooney. I have now read all but one of Sally Rooney's novels. I have not read Conversations with Friends yet. So we have Alice and Eileen And the two of them were best friends for many, many years. And Alice is a novelist, and she ended up like kind of crashing and burning after a release of one of her books. She ended up going into a mental institution for a very short amount of time and has come back and is trying to refresh her life. She's moved into a house that she's renting in a small town in the middle of nowhere. And she has met this guy, Felix, who they don't agree with each other a lot of the time, but there's something between them that they can't fight. She is writing about all this to Eileen, who has been in love with her best friend for years and years and years. Eileen, Alice, and Simon are very, very close. Simon was like an older brother figure in her life. He was someone who like helped on their, I think, farm that the family had when he was college age and she was like early high school or something like that. And she has had a crush on him since she was little, and now they've been friends for their entire lives. They're into their 30s. They had hooked up a couple times in the past, nothing happened of it. And Simon has never really been single or like really treated his girlfriends that well, and she has always wanted to be with him, but they haven't really figured out a way to do that yet. Most of what the plot of this book is Alice and Felix's relationship and Eileen and Simon's relationship as Alice and Eileen are writing emails to each other, and also about their friendship and how both of them feel like the other person isn't picking up the slack, how they think that the other person doesn't care about them as much and isn't going the extra mile for them, even though they're putting in about the same effort and aren't necessarily doing anything about it. I think that this book feels like a medium place between Normal People and Intermezzo, having read the books that precede and succeed this one. It feels like an equal balance between what is happening in those two books, and it was kind of weird. I do think that this is my least favorite of Sally Rooney so far. It does have the lowest rating of any of her books. I just didn't think it got its point across as much. It felt a little bit more like up in the air, and I do think that this was the least I have rooted for the relationships in her books. Particularly Alice and Felix, I had like major problems of them just like not seeming to be on the same page and kind of disrespecting each other. As is consistent with Sally Rooney's work, she's talking about emotional desperation and how so many people feel this way, that like the people around them don't feel the way that they do. People feel very lonely as they're not communicating with each other, and they're so desperate for connection with other people, but they're not actually going for it. And it's not until those things are directly addressed that anything really comes of it. I really liked the element of Alice and Eileen messaging each other, because we get to see the actual things that they go through, and then we get to see them digest it by messaging each other, and also how they're portraying that situation, whether it is truthful or might feel a little bit skewed through their perspective, but also just like the random musings that they have about life around them. I thought that that was a really interesting narrative structure, but I did find myself a little bit more frustrated than I had with her other books, even though I did end up generally enjoying this. Like, this is the one of the general fiction that I enjoyed more this month. So I feel like I have less to say about this than her other books, but like it just feels like it isn't quite Normal People and it isn't quite Intermezzo, but it's kind of trying to do the same things as both of them. Right now, I'm thinking I'm giving this a 4. It's good, and I think it still feels like Sally Rooney. It just wasn't as its own thing or as clear cut as I think some of her other stuff is. Then I listened to a book that I had just started hearing about in the last couple months that is a newer release that I was like, okay, this sounds super intriguing, super up my alley, even though it is the first book in the series. But I was really interested in this book because it was a series, because this is a horror series. And I don't feel like I hear a lot about horror series. So I was like, I gotta get on this. Maybe I can start the bandwagon. And that is Blood Slaves by Marcus Redmond, who I found out is actually like an actor-director person. If you watch Doogie Howser, apparently he was on that. I'm too young for that. But anyway, this is a book that is taking place during colonial America. It is set in Carolina on a plantation. We're following the lives of the enslaved people there, and they end up coming into contact with a Ramungan, which is an old boogeyman type story from Africa, as a lot of these characters are people who have been moved by the transatlantic slave trade. This is old enough that these people were the ones transported from Africa, not children of those people. This man comes and says, I see you all are being tortured. I have all of these powers because I'm basically a vampire. Do you want to have those powers to get revenge? And that is sort of the big question of book one. What are these people going to do? Are they going to take this power? How are different people going to react to this? So this is sort of a revenge horror. Here's the thing. I went into this book, the thing that I had heard so often was, this book has every trigger warning imaginable. That is how it was kind of being advertised to me. And so I was really worried that this book was going to be really descriptive in terms of like going out of its way to disturb you. And I think that this book has every trigger imaginable because it is just describing American slavery. To me, it did not feel gratuitous. I have read other books that take place during slavery that are much more descriptive and specific and horrifying in that way. In this book, it's not cleaning it up. It's kind of saying them matter of fact and dealing with the hurt that these people are having rather than reveling in the actual act of it in a way that I feel like would be very, very upsetting rather than just normal upsetting. We have multiple people that we're following, and I think there were some perspectives that I was kind of following more than others, that I was caring about more than others. I think Gertie was the one who I was the most invested in. The character journey of her over the course of the book is really the heart and soul of the book, of how her perspective is shifting. I thought it was especially interesting because this is happening at the beginning of American slavery, or at least, beginning in this location. So there's a little bit of a different attitude or like outlook that these people have, that they have different lived experiences than other books that I have read that are taking place during slavery. I think that was a good perspective to read from. And I think if you've read the author's note, I think it was a cathartic perspective to read from as these people are trying to shake off their shackles before they can pass it on to the next generation, unlike what actually had to happen in real life. It is a cathartic revenge horror. And in that, I like that. I think that there were some things about the vampires that I liked, and there were some things that I felt like were a little bit uncharacteristically goofy. They have like super speed, and the way that was described made me chuckle a little in a way that I don't think was intentional. I think that this book did so much what it said on the tin that it didn't leave a lot of room for me to be surprised. And I think there is room to grow in the next couple of books because I think we've left in a place which it actually feels like a very natural stopping point. The book very easily could have stopped here, but it's interesting that Marcus Redmond has more to say past here that I'm honestly pretty curious about, even though I felt kind of lukewarm about this book. I liked it. I liked our characters. I liked the plot for the most part. Because this decided to split this story into 3 books, I think less happens in book 1 than maybe you might have expected from the synopsis. And so it spends more time in like the real life. I think I was expecting it to go more into like the lore of the vampires, but that's something that we could do in future books. So I think this book was like a 3.5 for me. I think I am going to wait for reviews of book 2, which has been confirmed to be coming out later this year, to see how people are feeling about that. And that will be my deciding factor of whether I want to continue on. Then I read a different book that I just needed to get off my TBR. This is one of my 20 and 2026 books. Every year that I've done this 20 books challenge, I have picked 4 books that are some of the oldest on my TBR that I want to get out of here. And one that I bought basically just to get a different book from Book of the Month for only $5 instead of buying something full price was The Book of Longings by Sue Monk Kidd. This is not my usual fare at all, and I really don't know why I bought it. I think it's just because like I recognize the author's name as someone who has written some like modern classics. She wrote The Secret Life of Bees. And this is historical fiction about Jesus. The setup about this book is that there's this like biblical hoax that went around a long time ago that was about what if Jesus had a wife during the lost years? And the author was like, you know what? That's a really interesting hypothetical, because if that were true, she would be the most silenced woman of all time. So she decides to write a historical fiction novel about who would this potential woman be who would have been married to Jesus. The majority of this book takes place during the lost years, but we don't see Jesus for all that much of this book. It is mostly focusing on like who this woman is that he would have chosen to be with, I guess. But it's more like seeing biblical times and also seeing like how women were able to operate in that world, which is very, very little. Kind of seeing these characters from a new point of view, from a fresh point of view, seeing them not as like legendary figures as modern people would, but as real life human beings like a contemporary would. If this book did not have Jesus in it, if you just took the Anna plot by itself and removed the part of it being about Jesus, I don't think this book would have been that interesting. I just don't think Anna's perspective is that interesting to read from as her as an individual character. She is a person who really wants to tell the stories of women in the Old Testament who have been forgotten. This kind of went on for a long time. There was a lot of time where it kind of felt like, oh, we're gearing up for something and things didn't really happen. I think setting this during the Lost years made everything feel very small versus if she had tried to like insert a character into the times when Jesus is going around preaching. I think that might have been a little bit more engaging. Anyway, it just does what it says on the tin and nothing more. I think maybe setting it at a different time would have been more interesting. I don't know. I don't think I reviewed that book very well. I then decided to pick up something I could easily get through after a slower literary fiction. And I decided to pick up a romance on my shelf, and that is Real by Kennedy Ryan. Little did I know that this is the beginning of a companion series, and it's not my fault because this book came out, I want to say 5 or 6 years ago, and has yet to get a published follow-up. And also, this paperback edition with the redone cover, which I don't like this cover because it tells you absolutely nothing about what the book is about. Nothing about this cover says we're making a movie. She's just on a couch. Her outfit doesn't look anything like what her character looks like in the movie. I don't understand this cover of this book at all. This paperback copy with a brand new cover came out 2 years ago. So I was like, oh, safe. This is totally safe for me to read. It's a standalone. Turns out it's not. It's the beginning of a 3-book companion series, and I need that to not happen to me anymore. I'm going to tell you the synopsis of this, and then we're going to make some connections, and it's going to be really funny. This is about Cannon and Neva. Cannon is a director. He is a black man. He's done some documentaries. He's done some feature films. He's a big name in Hollywood for the most part, especially for a young man. And he, a couple years ago, came across this black female singer from the 1930s named Desi Blue, who had a very interesting life story, and he is wanting to make a musical biopic of her life. He ends up going with his friend to this Broadway show, and the understudy was filling in at the time, and her name is Neva, and she absolutely, as soon as she takes the stage, he's like, she has the talent, she has the focus, she has the feel of what I want Desi Blue to be. She already had a career, but he was kind of picking her out of obscurity for this giant, big budget movie to be the lead. And so that's part of the conflict of the book. This is a romance between the two of them. First thing we're going to address is that I read a book that is about black vampires. And then I also read a book that is about a movie being made of 1930s black musicians. If you combine this book with Blood Slaves, you get The Making of Sinners. I did not pick this book out for myself. This is a book that was given to me for free from this giveaway that my local bookstore back home was doing. And I kept this because this is an author that I've had my eye on for a while. But because of that director-actor thing, I was under the impression that this was going to have a power dynamic that I wasn't going to like. Turns out that wasn't that much of a problem for me in the book. There were other nitpicks that I had with the book, but I actually think that these characters were written at a level with each other. They actually did feel like they were equals in the way that they were written. In real life, I don't think that that would be something that I would feel. I really liked our characters individually. I really like Neva. I think she is a very interesting character. It's so fun to see this movie be made, and I love how she is absolutely going for it, even if she's pushing herself a little bit too hard. There was a particular scene that I really loved of Cannon seeing her get too emotionally involved in a scene and being like, I need to understand that the subject of this movie is really rough and I need to be taking care of my actors, and like decides to hire a set therapist. And I thought that that was good. I think that the relationship between these two is based on a lot of good communication, that it is very healthy if you want to read a book that does not have a third act breakup. Like the general fiction plot of this was so good for me. And I think because of that Kennedy Ryan is absolutely going to be an author that I want to read more from, even though there were little tiny bits here and there that I would have liked to be edited. I can split my critique into first act, second act, third act. First act, I thought that there was a little bit too much time spent apart thinking about each other rather than actually establishing their connection, because I felt like every single time that they're interacting with each other, all they're thinking is, oh my God, this person's so hot, instead of like living in the conversation that they're having. No, I actually want to see you get on as people before I see you like act on your attraction with each other. But then when we actually get to their relationship in the later acts, like it does feel well established that how their dynamic works. I think it was well written toward the end, but I didn't buy into it as much because it wasn't established that well in the beginning. The second act involves them getting into a secret relationship, and it stressed me out to no end that I kept having to put down the book because they are so shit at like keeping this relationship a secret. 0 people are fooled by this, and they are really reckless about it, even though they have this idea of like, it is going to be such a big deal if they're found out. I wish that they were better at keeping it a secret, and maybe that would be part of the plot. I think that would have played into what ends up being the plot of the third act, which third act, no notes, no complaints, none at all, which I think is really hard to do for a romance book. I think that was just done pretty much flawlessly, as well as it could possibly go. It's a little bit predictable, but like, it's a romance book. Who gives a shit? The more I've sat on this, the more I have enjoyed this. So even though this wasn't the Kennedy Ryan I would have picked up myself, I do think it was good. The next book is a second chance romance, and it is coming out, I think, in May. I didn't want to continue on in this because I didn't want to add a series to my TBR, but like, I like second chance romance and I liked this book. So I don't know. I think I'm giving this, maybe I'll give it a flat 4. Like, please make this book a movie. I really love for this book to be a movie. There were just like little tiny things that I was kind of like, not my favorite thing of all time. There are 2 more books that I have here to talk about. However, these 2 books are going to appear in my February vlog. So if you do not want to get spoiled for what is going to happen in that vlog, you can leave now. Bye, like, comment, subscribe, whatever. But I'm going to talk about these 2 books pretty quickly, and then I'll talk about them later in my vlog. So the first book that I was reading for this vlog was Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. This is a memoir from Bryan Stevenson, who is a big deal lawyer who has argued several times in front of the Supreme Court in the US and founded the Equal Justice Initiative, which is based in Alabama, trying to get people who are disenfranchised in one way or another access to justice through the justice system, because people who are non-white, people who are poor, people who are children, people who don't have people backing them up are much more likely to be going into prison for things that they did not do or for sentences that are way too high. And this is mostly following the story of Walter McMillan, who was accused of a murder that he could not possibly have done because there were like 20 witnesses that he was at his own house at the time. Bryan Stevenson, at the beginning of his law career, is assigned to help him. Walter McMillan is put on death row for this murder of this woman, and Bryan Stevenson is trying to get him off of death row. So that is the main plot of the book. That is like the string that we follow all the way through. But Bryan Stevenson is also talking about his like career a little bit, and what sort of things they are fighting in the courts at that time, and giving us examples of other cases that they were doing, a lot of them being children that he is defending when they were given life in prison when they were 13, 14 years old, which has now been struck down as cruel and unusual punishment because of Bryan Stevenson and the Equal Justice Initiative. I think that this book is very well written. He is a lawyer, so he is able to craft a narrative very well. It has, beginning, middle, end feeling, while also inserting lots of other stories to make it feel more a full picture about this fight for justice. I really appreciated seeing his insights and talking about the death penalty, talking about things like solitary confinement, talking about people with mental health problems, talking about all these different things, and seeing how the justice system so often fails these people, even when it is illegal for those things to happen. Stuff like how people who have severe mental health problems are not supposed to be on death row. They're supposed to be in mental health institutions. And there are many people who are not given the proper paperwork, are not given the fucking time of day to be able to put them into that category that they so obviously need to be in. It's a fight to pare back the death penalty as well, because we saw in the 70s and 80s, there was a lot of pushes to increase the death penalty, to increase the rapidity when people are going to be killed, and it is fighting that back because a lot of the times it isn't right. Bryan Stevenson just did a very good job building out what his life has been in this fight in a succinct way that feels very thorough, and I thought that this was just flawlessly executed. So this is a 5-star nonfiction from me. And the last book that I read this month was Wild Dark Shore by Charlotte McConaughey. And this is an author that I actually have disliked before. I read Once There Were Wolves and I actively disliked it. So I was really curious to see how I was going to feel about this one that was so beloved. This is taking place on an island that's closest continent is Antarctica. It's in the middle of nowhere, and it is a scientific research base because it has so many unique animals that are on it. And on top of that, there is a seed bank that has been put there of over 3 million species. There used to be a bunch of scientists there, but they are no longer there, and all that's left is the caretaker family, a father and his 3 children, who are packing up, getting ready to go as the seed bank is going to be closing because the island is sinking because of climate change. And there is a woman who washes up to shore in the last couple weeks of this being open who she's keeping secrets from them, they're keeping secrets from her, and it's kind of her integrating herself into this family and how they change because of this interaction with her. This is a general fiction that I was hoping was going to go a little bit more speculative than it ended up doing, but such is life. But I think, grounding it in this could be happening today is interesting enough. I think that this has a good mystery that ends up making you flip the pages a little bit faster. And for the most part, I think it has a pretty solid writing style. We get the perspectives of all the 5 people that were interacting with us on this island. Something that was interesting is that they have different points of view. Some of them are written from first person, some of them are written from third person, which I thought was kind of weird. I liked the discussion around environmentalism here. My main comment about Once There Were Wolves is how kitchen sink drama it felt. And by the end of this book, this did start feeling kitchen sinky. It felt like it's like, okay, but what's something dramatic that could happen? I think it gets away with it a little bit more than Once There Were Wolves because it is playing in the backstories of these characters rather than actually happening on the island at the time. I found myself thinking these characters were all right. I liked the dynamics of seeing like how everybody interacts with each other and everything. I like seeing people try to figure out what they want to fight for and what is right and like what are these fears that you should be having around climate change and everything. But I don't think I felt overly much for any of these characters individually. When, bad things happen to people, I was kind of like, okay, whatever, it's gonna happen, because duh. And I just don't think that this took this idea any further than I thought it was going to. But I did enjoy my time. Unlike when I was reading Once There Were Wolves. I'm gonna give this in the 3.5 to 4-ish range. I just wasn't blown away with it like basically everybody else was. Sorry. So those are all the books that I read in January. Let me know what you read. Have you read any of these? What did you think? If you'd like to follow me anywhere, you can find me at the links in the description. And you can now get my reader spreadsheet for 2026. This is the spreadsheet that I use every single time I finish a book. I make a new one every single year. And I also do have my series spreadsheet, my book series tracker spreadsheet that is also on the basis of a year. I have also put that up on my Etsy, so you can check those out if you want to support my channel. And if you would like to keep watching my videos, you can hit that subscribe button. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.